And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. On this podcast, we're going to talk about numbers for monopolies, how to calculate numbers for monopolies, and what a graph looks like for a monopolist firm. So let's say we have the following numbers for a monopoly. Let's say that we have the following numbers. Let's say output here. This is the quantity that the monopolist produces. That's the quantity of output. So it could be the number of TVs they produce or whatever it is that they produce. And just notice, I could write quantity as a lowercase q or as an uppercase q, because the lowercase q represents the individual firm and the monopolist is an individual firm. But I can also write a capital Q because the capital Q represents the market and the monopolist is also the market, since they are the only producers. So that's a unique situation, that the monopolist is both the individual firm and the market. Now, let's say that when the monopolist alters its output, it can produce 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many of these goods that it wants to. When the monopolist increases his output, that's going to push down the price of the good, because the monopolist faces the market demand curve. And maybe another way to think about this is in reverse order. If the monopolist cuts production, then they are able to raise the price by doing so, the price of the output. And that's why we would say that the monopolist is a price maker. The monopolist is a price maker, which is to say that they have control over the price. The monopolist has control over the price, and the way that they can control the price is by altering output, so that they can reduce output in order to increase the price. Now, what we want to do is we want to look at how to calculate numbers, the revenue numbers, based on this data. So if we have this data about a monopolist, the first thing that we'd want to do is calculate the total revenue. How do you calculate total revenue? Well, total revenue is simply price times quantity. It's simply the price times the quantity, the number of units that they produce, multiplied by the price. And then the second revenue calculation that we want to do is the marginal revenue, which is the change in the total revenue divided by the change in the quantity. The change in the total revenue divided by the change in the quantity. Now, I've done this on some other podcasts when we talked about pure competition. So what I would recommend is that you try to do these two calculations. Just hit pause and calculate the total revenue and calculate the marginal revenue. And then I'll just be back in a second and we'll take a look at those numbers together and I'll talk about them. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to calculate the total revenue, marginal revenue. Let's take a look at those numbers. So here's what I got for the marginal revenue and the total revenue. And let's just take a look at how I got a couple of those numbers. So total revenue right here is just output 1 times the price is 100. If the company produces 1 unit of the good, they sell it for $100, their total revenue will be $100, price times quantity. If they produce 2 units of the good, then they're going to have to lower the price in order to sell both of those units, so they're only going to be able to charge $95. 2 times 95 is 100. And 90. That would be the total revenue. If they produce 3 units of the good, then the price would be 90. 3 times 90 is 270. That's going to be your total revenue, and so on, going the rest of the way down. The marginal revenue is the change in the total revenue divided by the change in the quantity. So when output went from 1 to 2, that was a change of 1. And the total revenue went from 100 to 190. That was a change in 90. That is the marginal revenue for the second unit. When output went from 2 to 3, output changed by 1. The total revenue changed from 190 to 270, so that went up by 80. And so we would do 80 divided by 1, change in total revenue divided by change in quantity, and that would give you the marginal revenue of 80, and so on you would go the rest of the way down. So those are the marginal revenues. The next column that I give you are the fixed costs. Now, I don't really care about the fixed costs. I'm going to ignore them right now. I don't really care about them for this particular example. What I do care about would be the total costs. So let's say that these are the total costs of producing these different units. So if I produce 1 unit, the total cost of doing so would be $30. If I produce 2 units, the total cost of doing so would be $60. If I produce 3 units, total cost of doing so would be $80, and so on we would go. So these I've given you these total cost numbers, and then what I would ask that a student be able to do is to calculate the average total cost and the marginal cost. The average total cost, that is taking the total cost divided by the number of units that we produced. And then the marginal cost would be the change in the total cost divided by the change in the quantity. Okay, change in the total cost divided by change in quantity. And then finally, the last thing to calculate would be the profit, which is the total revenue minus the total cost. So you want to pause me again and try to calculate those numbers, and then I'll be back in a second to show you what I got, show you my calculations. Okay, so welcome back. Let's take a look at my numbers. So let me just move this out of the way. And here are the numbers that I got. You want to check yours against mine. And let's just talk about them very briefly. Let's just pick a couple and do it. So first of all, if I wanted to calculate the average total cost, if I was going to produce 4 units of the good, the average total cost would be the total cost, which was 110, divided by the number of units of output, which was 4, and that would give me an answer of 27.5. That would be my average total cost. If we did another one, if we produced 5 units of the good, the total cost was $150 to produce those 5 units. So my average total cost would be $150 divided by 5. My average total cost would be $30 per unit. So that's how you calculate these average total cost numbers. And then the marginal cost numbers, they are the change in the total cost divided by the change in the quantity, change in total cost divided by the change in the quantity. So let's just pick a couple of those and try it. Go back to right here where we were before. If I produce 1 unit and I go to 2, so I increase production by 1, there's that 1 again. I changed output by 1 from 1 to 2, then my total cost when I did that went from 30 to 60, so that was a change in my total cost of 30. And that then is the marginal cost right here of 30, because it would be 30, change in the total cost, divided by 1, change in the output. Let's try that again. If I increase production from unit 2 to unit 3, then my change in output would be, of course, 1. And let's see, that was from 2 to 3, so my total cost went from 60 to 80. So my change in my total cost was 20. 20 divided by 1, change in total cost 20 divided by change in quantity 1. That gives me my marginal cost of 20, and so on the rest of the way down until you get all these marginal costs. And then finally, your profit numbers would be change in total revenue divided by change in total cost. So that's pretty straightforward, but let's just say it real fast. If we produced 6 units, then my let's see, where was my total revenues? Right here. My total revenue would be $450 minus my total cost, which was $200, which would give us a profit of $250. Profit of $250. All right, so there's just working with some of the numbers for a monopolist. The big thing that has changed for the monopolist that is different from pure competition is right over here is the output and the price. And the big thing that has changed is that the firm can control the price. They can alter the price by altering their output. They can alter the price by altering their output. So what we're going to do on future videos, we're going to take these numbers and we're going to graph all these numbers and see what it looks like for a firm to make decisions under a monopoly situation. All right, so thanks for joining me. This has been Mr. Hagan on another Econ podcast, and we'll see you on the next podcast.